everybody, I'm Nick, and recently I made a video talking about technologies and practices I don't really use anymore in C# and .NET. And one of those practices or packages is using the MediatR package. Now, many of you said, yeah, begone MediatR, I don't want to use you anymore. However, some of you said, yeah, but I really need MediatR for certain features it offers. And I want to make this video to show you how you can actually replace all of MediatR's functionality with built-in functionality in ASP.NET Core and really not lose anything, because MediatR, in my opinion, makes zero sense to use. And I'm not going to talk about fast endpoints here. I've talked about them in the past and they're a great replacement. But if you wanted to keep controllers or minimal APIs and still have the same handling behavior, why are you sending the request through this thing that will be handled somewhere and you can't step into it? And I know there's source-generated versions of it as well. You don't need them, honestly. I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it. Now, here I have a very, very simple API. It has a bunch of product endpoints. So you have the products to sort of list them and then get them by ID, create a product, update a product, and delete it. Basic CRUD API. And then you have a few other things in here. For example, the MediatR handler. It's handling the query and then it's returning the response. You have another query by ID and then the response and so on. Your typical MediatR setup where you have the MediatR handle method, you inject any services you need in here, and then you just return back whatever it is you want to return, or whatever you created or updated, deleted, and so on. Now, one of the biggest arguments, people that say, yeah, but MediatR does this, is that MediatR has something called sort of a pipeline and behaviors you can configure. So if I go here, you will see that we add an open behavior for a login behavior and a validator or validation behavior on top of actually registering the handlers. And this is the feature everyone goes crazy over. Okay, you can do the exact same thing without MediatR. Yes, it makes sense because here you can have sort of your behavior and you say that this is a cross-cutting concern that logs on every request. So you're handling this request, you log it, and then when it succeeds, you say this, or if it fails, you say this. And if you want to be a bit more careful with this being finished, you might say finally here, and then you add this logging on the finally block, and then you can add metrics like it took this long to run this. Whatever it is, a flavor of this might exist in your code base if you're using MediatR. Same with the validators. So here we have some request validators, and then you have the validation behavior, which takes specific T request and T response, and then you check for validators, and then you return the errors in some way. Now, this is a great feature. This is a lovely feature. It does address things like cross-cutting concerns, both for logging, validation. It can be metrics, it can be OpenTelemetry stuff, it can be anything you want. However, .NET has a way to solve this problem without having to resort to these tools or to these packages. And you can do this using dependency injection based decoration. So you don't need to have this pipeline where it goes pop, 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 and then it's like a very not clear necessarily, but if you know how MediatR works, you would figure out how the flow goes. But any service, any logger, any handler, anything can have behavior that wraps it, and that can also be generic. So let me just very quickly update the project and explain step by step how this would work, because it can be a bit tricky to understand if you haven't seen it before. If you use the package like Scrooter, I've talked about this probably 5 years ago, then you maybe know how to use the decorate method of Scrooter to make this a bit easier, but you can do it purely on ASP.NET Core DI plumbing extremely easily. So I applied the patch. Let's see what changed. In the program.cs, you're going to see the bigger difference. So you no longer have that, MediatR doesn't even exist. So if I go here, the package has gone. The functionality is exactly the same. Now, this is done manually. You can 100% generalize it even more. And you have the same query and command features. So if you want to have your CQRS and the query and the handlers and all that, you still have it. I haven't changed the handling. You now have your own handler, which you can generalize and reuse. And then you have all the handlers basically exactly as they were, with some minimal changes, but fundamentally it's the same thing, and you still have the same login and validation behavior. How does it work? Well, exactly as it was. I mean, I moved this outside of the try, but I can put it back where I put it after I change it, and this looks practically identical. Same with the validator. Basically the exact same thing. Nothing changes in your code. The only change, and by the way, this is equally as generic as it was before, the only thing that changes is the registration. So now you have to decorate the request handlers that should have this decoration. Again, you can generalize this even further so you don't have to do it per query if you want. But sometimes I like the control of where decorator is applied and what can be excluded. And this extension method on the services basically registers the handler and it adds it as a transient dependency, and then you instantiate the decorator for the validation handler and the decorator for the logging. So themselves, they don't change, but the way they're registered in the I changes, because basically what happens is it says, okay, I'm going to handle the, I don't know, whichever method is in here. I'm going to handle this one, or I'm going to handle this one, because all the handlers here are in the same file. And I want to point out, by the way, nothing has changed in the way the handler itself is made. So the handler still doesn't know that it has validation or logging, the same way you wouldn't have it with a cross-cutting concern before with the pipelines. And the only difference is that the way things are registered now in dependency injection is that first request comes in over here in the endpoints. Again, I request handler, nothing special, not a specific validator or logging handler. So the way registration will work is the handler itself will be added as transient. Of course, you can change that to whatever lifetime you want. And then you register the handler of T-request T-type, but then you resolve the full-bodied handler internally. So you have your handler, and then depending on whether it should be decorated or not, you wrap it into the decorator. And if you need to do it with this decorator as well, or this login handler, you can do it. And then every time this handler is tried to be resolved, it will be resolved decorated. Again, everything here would be configurable, so you could change them if you want, or maybe you don't have to reassign them every time this way. Like, you can change this behavior in any way you want, but this would give you the exact same cross-cutting concern approach as you had before. And if you don't want to have a general decorated request handler and you want to have a decorate with logging or decorate with, validation or anything else, or if you want to use, for example, you can say, depending on how you build it, that you need a logger decorator and you need a validation decorator, so you'd have something like this in registration. You can also totally do that. That's completely up to you. But this gives you the exact same behavior as before. Everything will function the same. You control all the flow. You can see it here. You don't have the package dependency. Obviously, you don't have the pricing concern as well. But alternatives are free. You don't need them. Equally as good. You don't have to worry about any of that. The rest of the code will work exactly as it is. You don't need MediatR. ASP.NET Core supports it. But now I want to know from you, what do you think about this approach? And even if you can do it without the package, would you use the package anyway for some reason? Leave a comment down below, let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.